equity, the aspect of social inclusion, as well as the aspect of environmental justice. We're looking at how will it affect the environment, how will it affect the people, that is the jobs that they've been doing, especially those who are looking at all those who have invested in the fossil-based industries or economies as well. So the just transition is a global shift that the continent, not just Africa, is looking into in order to bring in the how can I put it? Sorry, in order to bring in the transformation kind of on how. Just a minute. Sorry, I haven't been recording this. Okay, sorry for that. I'm using two devices and I'm a bit confused. Yeah, so just as I said, that we're looking at the global shift from a fossil-based economy to a low carbon-based economy, and we're looking at the potential or the renewable energy potential in Africa, and also looking at the various alliances that the African as a continent can leverage on or can also form in order to accelerate our transformation agenda. So our speaker for today, who will let us know how this is possible and how this can be looked into from various aspects and angles, involving everyone. Everyone has a role to play in this sector, not just the researchers or the policy makers, but everyone, including the locals and the communities, how we can leverage on this and how we can make this achievable. So Dr. Uduak Akpan is a director in a spider organization in Nigeria. Is also a research fellow at ARIN, and he will be circling. He has a background in energy, clean energy to be specific, and he has done a lot of very recommendable job in clean energy sector. So Dr. Akpan, kindly take us through the presentation.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I share my screen?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, is everyone seeing my screen? Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you very much, Lavender. My name is Uduak, and my presentation today, it's on just energy transition for productive transformation in Africa. As a background, I'm a development economist, and I have a background in energy sector also. So I have a whole lot of interests in economic development of Africa and the countries in Africa. And I see energy as being a very important, as playing a very important role in achieving economic development. So my presentation, it's a short presentation. This is just a table of contents. First, we are going to look at the complex interactions between the energy sector and the larger society. And then we'll present an overview of electricity sector in Africa. I'll present key challenges. I will highlight the role of climate change, and also highlight the issue of financing. And then the conclusion. The way the presentation is done is just each section for each section, I start by presenting the key points in that section. So the first point is that different elements of the energy system have complex interactions. and create reinforcing loops with different variables in the wider society. So what we see here, it's I just try to represent how the energy sector as a whole interacts with the environment, interacts with the society. So the energy sector may be broken into the production segment, where we look at the primary energy sources from traditional biomass, coal, hydrocarbons, hydro, renewable energies, and others. So this list is not exhaustive. And then we have the transformation, and then we have the consumption in different sectors, consumption in different forms, as transportation, as residential consumption, industrial consumption, services, and agriculture. Now, each segment of this energy sector interacts with the larger society in so many ways. And it's important that we understand these interactions so that we can appreciate the challenges and the prospects towards any form of energy transition. First, the energy sector interacts with general economic development at the macro level and at the micro level in terms of investment, public sector, private sector investments. Energy sector, it's also very important to local politics because energy plays a role in national security. So energy security, it's an aspect of national security, and the energy sector is also a political instrument that can be used for different reasons. Then there is the aspects of geopolitics, essentially what happens in other countries, in other parts of the world, affects what happens in Africa, what happens in the countries in Africa, depending on how these countries play roles in the value chains of these energy systems. And most importantly, especially regarding the focus of this presentation, is that energy sector plays a very critical aspect in building the productive capacity of countries. By productive capacity, what we mean is the ability of countries to produce goods and services, high value goods and services that are competitive locally and internationally. So the energy sector supports in manufacturing and industrial development. And industrial development also reinforces the development of the energy sector. And then we have the technological evolution. This also has a reinforcing effect with the energy sector because energy drives technology change in different areas. And technology change also drives changes in energy sector in terms of production, transformation, consumption patterns, and so on and so forth. And then finally, environmental sustainability, which again links to climate change and just energy transition. So here, I just presented the energy generation mix in different countries, just to reinforce the points made in the previous slide. So here we find we have 4 countries, and these countries are selected carefully. China and India are fast-growing emerging economies. The United Kingdom and the United States are advanced economies. And what we see here is that for the United Kingdom, coal had always played a very important role as the country was developing its industrial capabilities. And as the country is trying to transition after achieving high levels of industrial growth and moving towards a service-oriented economy, coal is now being phased out. And so it is easier for a country like United Kingdom to discuss energy transition and the need to protect the environment because they have already achieved a high level of industrial development. They have built their productive capacities over time, and they are transitioning to a service-oriented economy. Similarly, we look at the United States. The United States, coal has always played a role, a very important role in the energy mix, but the role of coal is reducing. At the same time, the role of natural gas is increasing. Comparing this with China running India, these are two countries that are becoming the manufacturing base of the world. And we can see that coal is playing a very important role in the economic development of these countries. Coal indeed forms more than 50% of the energy mix, electricity mix of these countries. This highlights the importance of coal as a resource in terms of energy content, in terms of stability of the energy content, in terms of local availability, and the importance that coal plays as a base load in the electricity production systems of these countries that other sources of primary energy would not be able to play these kinds of roles. Similarly, the trend in India is quite similar to that of China.
A group training.
The second point is that energy sector of the 54 African countries differs significantly. And so even though the presentation talks about Africa, it is very important to understand that it's just in a very generic and sometimes doesn't even make any sense to look at energy pathways for a continent, given that every country in the continent differs significantly. So here we start by just highlighting the electricity generation trend, electricity capacity trend from 2000 to 2022. And we for ease of presentation, we decided to group with countries into regions. So we see here that while the electricity generation capacity across African countries has been increasing, the growth is driven primarily by North Africa, while Central Africa has recorded very low capacity improvements over the past 22 years. And then we look at the installed capacity in Africa and compare that with selected countries. And we can also see that China has grown from 2000 to 2022. The capacity in China has grown about over 8 times, while the capacity in Africa is not growing that much. This is very informative, given also that the economy of China has grown, and China is now the second largest economy in the world. So one can easily see the connections between the growth of the energy sector and indeed the underlying primary energy source used in the electricity sector of China, which is coal. The third chart here just shows the installed capacity per capita across the different sub-regions in Africa, which also re-emphasizes the fact that North Africa has grown substantially, while Central Africa, East Africa, and other parts of Africa, apart from North Africa, these other regions have not really grown. And then this also shows the changes in the generation mix across 2 periods. In 2000, the generation mix in Africa was dominated by coal, and in 2022, it's dominated by gas, even though coal also has a large share in the mix. Interestingly, renewable energy resources the share of renewable energy resources has increased substantially over this period. The third point I want to share is that there are key challenges. These key challenges are in terms of electricity access, which is a manifestation of the inefficiencies in the electricity sector of the country. And then other challenges such as economic constraints, fiscal space, investment risks, and climate change. So here we see the electricity access rates across Africa. The most recent reports by the Sustainable Energy for All report, which is produced in partnership with the International Energy Agency, the World Bank, and the UNDP, shows that out of 760 million people without access to electricity in 2022, 80% were in Sub-Saharan Africa. And so this map just shows the electricity access rate across Africa. On the right side of the screen, and I think this is also very important because most often people overlook this. On the right side of the screen, we try to show that there are underlying drivers that affect electricity access and the difficulties in providing access to electricity. One of such drivers, it's the settlement patterns in countries. So here we find Algeria and DR Congo, two of the largest two countries in Africa by land mass. On the top right map, what you observe here is the population settlements in Algeria. I mean, 90% of the population, it's around the northern part of the country, around the coastline with the Mediterranean. And so it is the unit cost of providing electricity becomes very low compared to a country like DR Congo, where the population settlement pattern differs, and it's spread all through the country. And so it's going to be much more expensive to provide access to electricity, to carry out electrification projects in DR Congo compared to Algeria. And the strategies for electrifying DR Congo would need to be very different from the strategies used in Algeria. So this is just what this slide tries to represent. And then the most important part of the challenges, which relates with the focus of our presentation, it's the productive capacity index of different regions in the world. Now, UNCTAD has done a lot trying to understand the underlying factors that affect countries' productivity. And they developed this composite indicator called Production Capacity Index. The index covers different aspects of countries that facilitate the ability of the country to be productive. And so these include human capital, natural capital, energy transport, ICT, the quality of institutions, the quality of the private sector, and the direction of structural change in the countries. So what we observe here is the productive capacity of Africa has consistently been lower than the productive capacity of every other part of the world. And this means that it's unless this pattern changes, economic growth may be difficult. And if economic growth is difficult, any form of just energy transition would not happen. And then finally, in terms of the challenges, we present the debt sustainability of countries. And this is important because energy sector investments are capital intensive. They require long lead time. And the nature of risks that are associated with energy sector investments implies that countries need to invest in energy sector and they shouldn't just leave it to private sector. However, countries are unable to invest, are unable to raise capital to invest in energy sector because most African countries are in debt. And the debt level of African countries, with the exception of Botswana, the debt level is not sustainable. And here we just see that some countries are already in debt distress. Some have very high risks of debt distress. Some have moderate risks of debt distress. And this essentially affects countries' ability to make strategic investments in energy sector. And it's also important to note that in energy sector, the larger the capacity of the investment, the larger the unit cost, as it is with any other sector. Energy sector benefits sufficiently from economies of scale. The fourth point I want to make is that climate change is a risk and also an opportunity. In other words, climate change affects African countries in so many ways. But African countries can view just energy transition as an opportunity to build its capacity, its productive capacity. And it's only with a higher productive capacity that countries can adapt to the impacts of climate change. Adaptation would be difficult when countries don't have the capacity to adapt. And essentially, countries need to look at the opportunities that can be harnessed from these situations. This is also critical because the population of African countries is increasing rapidly, and the rate of urbanization is also increasing. So just energy transition must be framed in a manner that results in economic benefits, in social benefits, and in environmental benefits. And I intentionally put economic benefits first because the economic benefits would have to be what drives the social benefits and the environmental benefits. So in this section, first, we look at the Human Development Index across the world, as published by UNDP. And we could see that most countries in Africa have relatively low Human Development Index. Now, we also see that climate change, as highlighted previously, hydroelectric power represents an important share of the electricity generation mix in many countries in Africa. But hydropower is highly vulnerable to climate variability because it depends on dams, and with climate variability, we have rainfall patterns that are not that are less predictable. We have higher level of evaporation, and this essentially implies that the reliability of hydropower would be reducing over time. So climate change would affect hydroelectric power of most African countries, and countries need to react to this. And then here we just remind ourselves that the population of Africa is increasing. Projections by UNDP indicate that by 2050, Africa would constitute about a quarter of the world population. And Africa has the youngest population in the world. This means that the level of urbanization would increase. There will be more urban areas. And this has a whole lot of economic impacts in terms of energy, security, and in terms of climate change. So here is just a summary of some of the points I've made. Countries need to build productive capacities again to facilitate structural transformation, economic growth, export diversification, among others. And this productive capacity has to be linked to energy use and has to be linked to any form of energy transition. Here, we see that globally, the levelized cost of renewable energy technologies have been reducing. And people usually use this to make an argument for the adoption of renewable energy technologies at any cost. We agree, as a person, I agree that it's reducing, but it is also important to understand that the computation of this reduction, it's done using projects that are implemented in different parts of the world. And the projects in Africa, it's a small share of the total number of projects in different parts of the world. And generally, projects in different parts of the world are usually cheaper than projects in Africa. So even though the average may be reducing, the levelized cost of these technologies is not this low. It's not as low as this when it comes to Africa. Nevertheless, this forms a strong argument on why countries need to adopt just energy transition, why countries need to adopt renewable energies at all costs. Okay, so having presented the general overview for Africa, I thought it's important to look at some case studies on the electricity sector in different countries. This would help understand the country-specific dynamics, and also why it might be easier for some countries to adopt greener pathways, and why it might be very difficult for other countries to adopt greener pathways, and why any energy pathway that countries adopt also needs to reflect global trends in renewable energy, and why this needs to be tied to economic development and not just social issues like energy access, but strong economic development issues, issues that relate with building the productive capacity of countries. So for our case studies, we selected four countries, one country from North Africa, one from Southern Africa, one from East Africa, and one from West Africa. South Africa, from Southern Africa. South Africa, is the most industrialized country in Africa, is the most carbon-intensive country in Africa. And we can observe from the electricity generation mix that coal dominates the electricity generation mix in South Africa. And of course, the growth in electricity access in South Africa has been amazing, with the fall of with the fall of apartheid regime and the new government of Nelson Mandela mandated the utility ESCOM to electrify areas that are dominated by Black Africans. This meant that the level of electricity demand increased faster than the capacity to invest in electricity expansion. And this has resulted in rolling blackouts in South Africa for over 7 years. And beyond the blackouts, the response of the South African government first is to increase capacity of what they have, and also to diversify as much as possible. But investments take time. Investment in electricity generation capacity takes time. Notwithstanding, the South African government and utility and private sector have been doing their best. But what we see here is that in terms of just energy transition, it might be more difficult for a country like South Africa to shut down its coal power plant. And they shouldn't even shut down its coal power plant, because if coal is what to drive economic growth, if coal is what to drive opportunities, then the coal station should remain. That's my own opinion. Until such a time that generation from other technologies can comfortably replace the generation from coal. The important thing here is that energy has to drive economic growth. And while environmental sustainability is important, economic employment or loss of employment, technological innovation, manufacturing, industrial development are also very important. And in the energy policies of countries need to make these decisions as to which pathway works best. And here we see that for South Africa, what matters is economic growth. And from that perspective, even though South Africa has been increasing the capacity of renewable energy, which is good, which is great, and which is what needs to be done, coal would keep on playing a role in the energy futures of South Africa for the foreseeable future. The second case study is from West Africa, and I decided to use Nigeria for obvious reasons. From Nigeria, so I think I should be able to speak about the energy sector in Nigeria. So in terms of installed capacity, the installed capacity has grown over time in Nigeria. Here, it's important to note that there is a difference between installed capacity and willing capacity. Even though the installed capacity is about 13,000 megawatts, the actual operational capacity is less than 6,000 megawatts. And I also decided to put the structure of the electricity sector in Africa, in Nigeria, sorry, here. And the reason is this, that the legal structure of the electricity sector can affect the performance of the sector, can affect the willingness to invest, can affect many other aspects of the sector. In Nigeria, the sector is dominated by private sector and not public sector, because of electricity sector reforms that started in 2005. Now, electricity access in Nigeria is about 60%, and there is a reason for this difference in electricity access, and this scenario also applies to most other African countries. The national average is about 60%, but within the country, different sub-national regions, different states in the country have very different electricity access, and it also links to the point I made when I tried to compare Algeria and DR Congo. What we see here is that states with high population density have much higher electricity access rates. And that also, states with higher population density have higher coverage of the transmission line, and by extension, the distribution lines, and so on. And with the way the power sector in Nigeria is structured, which is private sector dominated, what we find is that most states in the northern parts of the country have much lower electricity access rates, but they also have a higher solar irradiation, which makes which makes off-grid electrification more viable in the northern part of the country. And because off-grid electrification often uses renewable energy, what drives renewable energy or just energy transition in Nigeria? It's the economics of it. The economics of it in the sense that in a certain part of the country, there is low access rates and there is high solar irradiation. And the grid, it's going to be very capital intensive to expand the existing grid because this other region of the country, the northern part of the country, is regarded as being economically disadvantaged, which makes off-grid electrification the most viable, most viable strategy for providing access to electricity. And this essentially is what drives the adoption of renewable energy or energy transitioning in Nigeria. But beyond that, Nigeria, it's a resource-rich country and has hydrocarbons. So for Nigeria, the just energy transition pathway requires leveraging on its abundant natural gas. In other words, Nigeria needs power. Nigeria needs to power industry. Nigeria needs to power manufacturing. And to power manufacturing, Nigeria has to leverage on its abundant natural resources. When Nigeria is able to power manufacturing, Nigeria can then adopt the manufacturing of adopt pathways to facilitate manufacturing of renewable energy and implementation of renewable energy or just energy transition strategies. The third case study here, it's Morocco. Morocco, it's one of the fastest growing countries in Africa. And Morocco, it's regarded as a country that has very high level of productive capacity, in the sense that Morocco produces automobiles, produces aeronautic engines, and the manufacturing sector in Morocco, it's very strong. However, Morocco doesn't have hydrocarbons and relies on hydrocarbons to meet its electricity needs or its domestic needs. At the same time, Morocco has enormous resources, enormous solar and wind resources, and the country has invested tremendously invested in different power plants. Here we see the electricity mix of Morocco. And we see that solar, even though the country still has coal and hydro, the share of solar has increased substantially in the past 10 years. So here we just highlight how solar has increased. Morocco has the largest concentrated solar plants in the world. And this is quite important in the context of just energy transition in Africa, because this is an enormous investment in renewable energy technologies in Africa. However, it's important to point that these investments is not necessarily for the love of just energy transition. Rather, it is because Morocco understands that its energy security, it's highly dependent on solar and wind. And by doing so, the country has facilitated the growth of the industrial sector of the economy. Fourth and last case study here is Ethiopia. Sorry, let me check the time. Okay. The fourth and last case study is Ethiopia. The electricity mix of Ethiopia is dominated by hydro. Indeed, Ethiopia is one of the countries in the whole world that has electric generation mix that's it's more than 90% renewable energy. Ethiopia doesn't have hydrocarbon resources and has a lot of renewable energy resources. And the government of Ethiopia has dedicated itself to the development of hydroelectric power. Here is a picture of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is not yet completed. It's not yet completed. It has reached advanced stage. Now, some lessons to learn from Ethiopia, which I think really underscores our discussions on the role of energy in driving productive capacity, economic development, productive transformation, and just energy transition. So first, it's that what we can learn from Ethiopia is that Ethiopia did not just start by developing large size hydroelectric power resources. It started small, from 5 megawatts to 10 megawatts to 20 megawatts and so on. And this was done intentionally. This was done so within the Nile River, there are many countries that benefit from the Nile River. And based on the legal paths, one country cannot single-handedly obstruct the flow of Nile River because it's the lifeline of other countries. So it was difficult for Ethiopia to get resources, to get loans to develop its hydropower resources. Because the usual financiers, multilateral development banks or bilateral development banks refused. So the country had to fund it through its budgets. Also, some technical partners in other parts of the world in China refused, and because they don't want to offend other stakeholders. So what Ethiopia did, which has turned out to be a very good example of how the adoption of renewable energy can improve productive capacity, is that it started small. By starting small, the project managers, who are essentially Ethiopians, could learn on the job. They could learn from building the small-scale power plants, and they could use that knowledge to build larger capacity power plants. And the knowledge is also transferable to other parts of the economy. Second, we also know the importance of public sector funding in the development of renewable energy resources. And we know that since it's hydropower, hydropower has to be developed on site. And it has a much significant backward linkages with other parts of the economy because you need to supply steel, you need to supply cement. It has a larger employment multiplier effect than, say, solar or wind. So through the development of hydropower plants, the government of Ethiopia also inadvertently developed the construction industry. And then electricity is used as one of the items to attract investors. And I got this to the right of the screen. I got this tariff from the website of the utility. And what you can see here is that the tariff for industry is lower than tariff for residential. And indeed, a tariff for higher voltage industry is lower than tariff for low voltage industry. So in Ethiopia, Ethiopia wants investors to come and take advantage of the availability of cheap electricity to increase the scale of their production, benefit from economies of scale, make the country more competitive. And then also an aspect of productive capacity. It's the involvement of universities in the entire process of developing hydroelectric power plants in Ethiopia. And this human capacity development is very important for the productive transformation of every country, of any country. And Ethiopia was able, or is still able, to do this very well. And this shows how the development of renewable energy resources, just energy transition, has to be linked to productive capacity improvement in any country. So here we just try to contrast cases. Private sector investments may be very useful in increasing access to, increasing the generating capacity, but they are usually not designed to have impacts on the economy with respect to productive transformation. And I mean, most countries that have utility scale solar or wind would attest to the fact that if it's private sector funded, then most of the facilities, most of the equipment will be imported. And it's only the installation that will be done locally. And in some cases, they will still need to import people to come and support the installation. And this is not a very good example of how to link electricity to productive capacity. Also, in some cases, we find that public sector projects, and a good example is with Nigeria, public sector projects loan from the World Bank that is linked to with the objective of providing electricity access was done in a way that most of the equipment had to be imported, and it's still not good. So we suggest some level of some form of public-private partnership in the design of projects in a way that would maximize the local multiplier effects of such projects. So the ARIN has very good reports, which I thought I should highlight, on how to leverage local capacity for small-scale hydropower, and also how to leverage local capacity for solar PV. And these are good examples of how just energy transition needs to be designed in a way that would facilitate productive capacity of every country. The fifth point is that one of the central challenges of just energy transition, of improving electricity sector in Africa, it's finance. And this is because electricity sector projects are capital intensive, require long lead time. And most African countries are usually regarded as highly risky, which the risk rating affects the lending rates they get from multilateral development or bilateral partners. And so first we start by looking at how the terrain of private sector investments in renewable energy projects has been within the past 12 years. Here we see that 4 countries dominate private sector investments: Egypt, Kenya, South Africa, and Morocco. And we talked about reinforcing loops. The fact is, if most countries cannot attract investments, then most countries would, the inability to attract investment because of the risk profile, because of many other variables, many other factors, means that it's going to require a very, it's going to require some level of strategic push to change the circumstances in these countries. So here, I just wanted to highlight the risk profile in the world, how different credit risk agencies assign risks to countries. Here we can see that in Africa, Ethiopia already it's dark brown, which also highlights why the hydropower projects had to be funded by governments. And then we can see that the countries that attract investment, like Kenya, like Morocco, like South Africa, like Egypt, have some shade of green, which is also quite informative. Now, Africa, virtually every sector, virtually every country in Africa has an enormous amount of renewable energy resources, be it solar, wind, hydropower, geothermal energy, name it. But from my perspective, investment in solar power, the bulk amount of the investment comes, the bulk amount of investment goes to the panels, and panels are produced. China has a comparative advantage in the cost of panels. So if any country requires to generate additional 5,000 megawatts, the question is, which renewable energy resource would provide the highest amount of local value addition? And this question is important from the perspective of productive capacity, which is the focus of this presentation. And so we looked at hydropower, investment in hydropower resources. Studies have shown that many countries have very huge capacity for hydropower resources. Not the big ones, but the small ones, the 1 megawatt, the 3 megawatt, the 5 megawatt projects. And I personally think it's one resource that countries really need to look into. In terms of the financing landscape has been dominated by multilateral and bilateral development organizations, and sometimes our private sector investment, but most private sector investments would need some level of risk mitigating instrument or guarantees from still these multilateral development banks. One very unique thing that has happened in recent times, it's that the Afrexim Bank has decided to incorporate the Africa Energy Bank to focus on investment in energy resources in Africa, which I thought I should highlight, and that's why I said financing landscape is changing. But also, it's important to note that domestic public sector finance, it's the most important source of finance, and countries need to finance projects and link the financing of those projects to productive capacity, to industrial capacity, to research, to knowledge generation, and so on. So in conclusion, just energy transition is important, but must be just for the country. For this to happen, energy transition must be linked to productive transformation. Thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Akpan, for that wonderful presentation. I hope you can hear me. I thank you for that wonderful presentation about
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
All right, thanks. About the aspect of transitioning, where we're looking at the aspect of energy security, we're also looking at the aspect of energy sector and energy interaction to the society from production all the way to consumption. I think that was a well elaborated and self-explanatory presentation. I really don't know if there's someone with a comment, a question, or just an addition. The floor is open. You can feel free just to add something, especially if you've done any project in line with the issue of energy transitioning, looking at how countries can leverage on their energy mix. Whatever we've just noticed that most countries doing well economically are depending on the fossil fuels, like South Africa, which is most industrialized, is depending. Its higher percentage of economic growth is powered by coal, which is very dangerous. I mean, when we're talking of the transitioning, we're dealing away with things like coal. You've talked of Niger depending on the natural gas, which is, I feel is also a non-renewable energy source. And once these things will be depleted, where are we heading to as the global south countries? So yeah, I just want to welcome everyone to add something, a question, a comment. Feel free to do so, or I'll just choose randomly. I believe you are all listening to the presentation, and we all energy expert. I mean, we interact with energy every day, every single day. So maybe you can also write in the comment section. I'll read it for you. So maybe I'll go first. Dr. Akpan, I'm an energy student, and one thing that I've realized within my 4 months of studying, one thing that is so critical is the aspect of oil and gas in most countries that are producing that. That is, I think West African countries we are leading, Nigeria, Ghana. They're really producing enormous amount of oil and gas. And when talking of transitioning, we really know that not maybe in a dream we won't do away with oil and gas here. I'm just convinced that we won't do, because we don't have the perfect substitution, and also the demand is increasing high every day. And when you're talking of leveraging on the renewables, what about the oil and gas sector? What should we do? And are we really sure that we'll do away with it? And what is the next step for those countries who are relying on that?
Okay, do I get maybe 2 or 3 questions before I respond? Or
All right. Let me see. Charles, are you having a question or Nancy? Nancy, you told me you have a question. You can go ahead. Nancy? Okay, in the course of time, you can just answer that as we wait for them. Someone is telling me she's typing in the comment section.
Okay, thank you very much. So my perspective is this. There have always been discussions about energy transition, but coal is still around. And the fastest growing countries in the world, China and India, they still have their coal. The thing is this, different. So you have the capacity of the different sources of energy, and every source of energy is very unique. That's one part. The second part, we have issues with the level of development of different countries, and the level of the productive capacity inherent in different countries. And then we have environmental considerations. And some of these things are complementary, some of these things are conflicting. Every country's energy policy should focus on domestic energy security in the short and the long run. Now, the energy components that fit into this domestic energy security in the short run might be different from the energy sources that will be relevant in the long run. But in the long run, countries need to build their productive capacity. Countries need to industrialize. Every country, you need to manufacture what you are consuming. You need to have that capacity to manufacture and to compete internationally. And from that perspective, the next question is, which of these energy resources can drive manufacturing? Which energy resources have driven manufacturing in the countries that have developed previously? So European countries, America, which energy source drove manufacturing when they were developing? The people that are developing currently, China, India, which energy source is driving manufacturing? And the thing is, African countries need to build their capacity to manufacture. So as part of just energy transition, it is not sufficient for a country to implement a 50 megawatt solar energy project if all the solar panels are imported from China. So if a country needs to implement a 50 megawatt solar project, country has to design a way to ensure that there is sufficient local value addition within the country. So in terms of countries that are rich in hydrocarbons, hydrocarbons need to be used to drive manufacturing first. The productive, it's the productive capacity of countries that would determine whether the countries can adapt even to climate change.
Yeah.
So countries should focus on whichever energy would help the country to build their productive capacity. And if it is going to be renewable energy, countries should focus on the renewable energy or should design programs that would maximize the local value addition of the renewable energy projects. So that is essentially my perspective.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I think that's well detailed. Also, maybe just to add another question, I really don't know if it's kind of related here. The aspect of energy poverty in Africa. We also looking at the potentials that we have, the renewable potentials that we have in Africa. But there's some countries which, like Kenya being an example, we have, I think, we're the largest country producing the geothermal energy. Is it in the whole world or in Africa we're the best? I don't know which position we are in, but I think we're top 3. But we're still lagging behind in terms of energy access and energy security as well, looking at the acceptability, the accessibility, and even the whole areas of the energy security. So one of the key findings was the aspect of energy stack, where someone is able to use the renewable energy sources, like we have the solar panels and everything. Of course, some are being imported the same way you've said that a country shouldn't really rely on that if we're importing it, but we have to accept that most of the things we're using here is imported. But we're struggling with the issue of energy stack, where someone is still 1 minute using biomass, the next minute using the renewable. So how can we go about that in order to just achieve the NDC that we set of reaching the net zero or the 1.5 degrees of climate change, CO2 emission, that is?
Okay, thank you. I think there are different points there. The first point is energy access. Energy access is a very important component of energy policy, especially for Sub-Saharan Africa, where most countries have less than 100%, maybe some not up to 70 or 60% electricity access rates. So electricity access is very important from a social perspective. But you see, there are so many. So we started by presenting so many factors affecting energy sector, energy policy. There is the economics, there is the politics, there is the climate change, and so on. So my views about the use of traditional biomass is that one should not condemn the use of traditional biomass for the love of the environment. And the reason is this: even if we add all the environmental effects of reliance on traditional biomass for cooking in Africa, it is probably not up to 2% of what other people are doing in destroying the environment. That's one point. And so there is the politics of it that we should always keep in mind. The second point is that countries usually have agenda. So we can find energy access projects supported by grants from some European countries. And so there are grants, and so it's free money. Why reject it? But these projects are designed to support the manufacturing of appliances in their home countries, because you'd end up getting all the appliance you need from the home countries of the donors. So that's the part we also need to understand. Now, if it's a grant, it's not a problem. But if it is a loan, countries should be very careful. And the reason is this: if a foreign partner gives a loan of $500 million, and out of that $500 million, $300 million goes back to his home country to support manufacturers of equipment in his home countries, but the recipient country will still need to pay the loan, and the recipient country has a whole lot of debt obligations. So my view is that such projects should be discouraged. Rather, projects should be designed in a manner that, even if it means to assemble part of the solar facilities locally, but there should be some form of local value addition. So that's essentially the points the presentation is trying to make.
Okay. Thank you. I dropped off at some point. I don't know what happened to my network. So, okay, that's well noted. Akinyi, I really don't know if you have something to say. Charles, I can see you here before Akinyi. Sorry, Charles. Charles, can you hear me? Okay, I'll welcome Jim to just give us a comment. Jim is working on another project as well related to the just transitioning. Jim, please.
Thank you very much, Lavender. And Uduak, this is a great presentation. It's just that I've been dropping on and off, so I've really lost quite a lot. But I think from what I have gathered, I think it would be very helpful, because myself, I'm also looking at strategies that to promote renewable energy adoption in Africa. So I think for development, energy is really critical for economic development, and that is why the topic is important and really needs to be looked at. And we are now, with climate change coming in, then we are also now looking into renewable energy. That's where we are moving into. So it would be important for us to also look at that. I might not have so much to say due to the fact that I really dropped out many times, so I didn't really follow up. But it's I think it's a good work. I would appreciate if probably you could share the slides. Thank you.
It's okay, no problem. Thank you.
Thanks to Jim. I'll facilitate that as well. I'll welcome Florence before I think time is much spent. I'll welcome Florence to give us some final remarks before we end our meeting today. Florence, please. Is Florence in the call? Okay. Seemingly she's not here. I really don't know what's happening. Okay. Any other person I'm leaving behind? Okay, seemingly there isn't. Probably, maybe this is a new topic for many of us, especially if we're not well conversant with the aspect of energy, the renewables, and even the transitioning is also, the aspect of energy, just energy transition is also new to most of us, since we're not well conversant with most most terms and most things that have been said here. So what I really think all of us have learned something, even as we get into this new phase on talking of adaptation and looking at how energy plays a critical role in climate change adaptation and adapting to the new form of reduced low carbon emission in Africa and just the whole world to mitigate the impact that we're seeing today. So I would love to close this meeting that we've just had. I think it's coming to an end. I want to thank everyone who found time to join us today. This is a well and a timely presentation that we're having, especially by the fact that most countries today are trying to reach the zero or the net zero emission, and even the Paris Agreement that most countries are part of, which looked at the emission to 1.50%, 1.5 degrees, that is, not percent. And we also trying as a country that is Kenya, and even most countries in Africa, Nigeria being included, to work within our set indices. Yeah. So thank you so much for that presentation. It's really, yes, Charles, I called you. I don't know if you're able to say something. I can see your comment there.
Apologies.
That's
transition
okay.
to the laptop because I joined phone. I'd assign me which one when you call me.
Not literally at all. I think you had the conversation throughout. We're just tackling how countries can leverage on the just. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So we just tackling how countries can leverage on the renewables that we're having, our potentials to accelerate our transformation as the global south, and the fact that you're working on issues of adaptation. I would love for you to just give a comment and any addition that you can add. Yes, Charles.
I didn't get you. Let me rejoin again.
Okay.
I'm going to download me. Apologies, my internet is really okay. Yes, I've managed to reach you. Yes, Lavender, please come again.
All right, Charles. So I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. So the presentation we're just tackling is about how the global south can leverage on the renewables so as to accelerate their economic development. And looking at the points that we've just tackled, we're looking at the energy security, the aspect of environmental sustainability, etc., and the fact that you're working on a project that deals with adaptation, especially at the local level. How can the locals be involved? Like, just give us your opinion on this, and what addition can you add? I hope you had the conversation throughout though.
Yes, first let me congratulate Dr. Akpan for his very comprehensive presentation with some empirical perspectives, especially from Africa. And I liked how we really framed especially the just energy transition in Africa, that it goes beyond merely shifting energy sources, but it entails a comprehensive approach that prioritizes equity, inclusivity, and sustainable development goal. Sustainable development. Now, when you talk of equity and the question that you have asked in terms of looking at it from the locally led adaptation perspective, energy plays a very strategic role, especially for Africa when you talk about adaptation, because one, when you look at the renewable energy, Africa, of course, is endowed with all critical renewable energy sources. One is solar, second is hydro. We have got the gas, and of course, like Kenya, really pursuing also like nuclear energy. Now, where do we place, especially now, the target population in Africa? Because majority still live below the dollar per day. Now, one of the critical perspective that we need when you're looking at especially poverty reduction is not only the sources, but the deployment and also the incubation of sources that the communities can be able to really co-own with the governments, not where largely maybe led or owned by the governments. We can look at, for instance, the conversations which have been having, especially looking at the oil explorations in Kenya, the wind energy, and looking at the northern part of Kenya. And government has been actually really looking at the policy aspects that can really provide the opportunities for the communities, not only to access the energy, but also job creation. But the question is, what are the options, investment options, when you look at the climate finance and investment policies, the policies that are focusing on investments, are they really living up to that spirit of really it being inclusive when you're looking at the sources and then generation and the deployment, and actually really supporting these energy systems and communities to co-produce now innovative solutions? So what I can recommend moving forward to achieve just energy transition is to relook at the development policies, because we cannot run away from governments have invested a lot in the development policies. Of course, we have picked as Africa when you're looking at now locally led adaptation, and also, of course, like local climate action agenda. We are looking at the World Bank supporting the financing locally led climate action in Kenya, and also other countries, other donors are looking into that. But the question is this: how are our policies, development policies, really, are they receptive to this policy transition towards just energy transition? Because those policies, again, they're deploying a lot of public resources, national resources to the sub-national and the local level. And then the second question is, are we doing sufficient policy impact evaluation so that we can identify the entry points? Because the debate that happened at the African Union this week, when they were discussing the carbon credit, one of the comments in the WhatsApp group where we are part of bringing together key stakeholders is, where are we in terms of carbon credit? Where do we stand when we meet the local communities? Do we talk about land? Because if you tell them to plant trees, so that they can support renewable energy solutions, will their lands be in question? You know, the resources itself, let's say renewable energy sources like the fuel wood, the sources of gases, so those spaces. So you realize that we need to relook at the development policies, but first we need to do policy impact evaluation, and then again undertake comprehensive assessments regarding now where we want to go in terms of sources, and also and also the deployment pathways, because there's chances of resistance, not because the communities are resisting, but because of the lack of trust that is likely to emerge in terms of Are they going to co-own, or are they going to own, or are they going to co-own, especially those particular sources? And of course, lastly, our data systems. I think I'll appreciate Morocco in Africa, Kenya in terms of developing the open data portals, which are still evolving in terms of opening spaces for development partners. We were part of the team in Kenya supporting the development of the energy, sustainable energy messaging for the website. And one of the important gap that we have is, are we leveraging the data from different sectors? Because when you talk of just energy transition, you are talking of diverse energy sources pursuing a mixed option, meaning that you are touching on the different sectors. You're touching on the livestock when you talk of biomass. You're touching on the forest when you talk of tree as a source of, as a medium. So what we need to do now is to refocus on the energy data system for Africa. Thank you so much, Lavender, for facilitating, and thank you, Dr. Akpan, and also the participants who are present.
It's okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Charles.
Okay, thanks too. I think at this point, Charles has just wrapped up everything that you want to say. I'll just ask everyone to turn on their camera so that we take our final photo. And that's if you're comfortable. Yeah, we also need your consent for that. So if you're comfortable, just turn on your cameras. Nancy, can you help us take a group photo before we end this meeting for today? When you're ready, let us know, please. Benjamin, Ferdinand, kindly, let's turn on our cameras. Jerry. All right, Nancy, we're waiting for you. And we can all smile as well. It's Friday. Nancy can just react when you're done. I know you have audio issues. Just let us know when you're done. Or I hope that's Nancy. All right, thanks so much, everyone. Let's touch base next time, and thanks so much, Dr. for coming through for this presentation. That was timely, and I hope everyone is going home with something. Yeah, so let's all read as well, and have a great weekend.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and bye.
Thanks.